What most people forget about Icarus is that before he fell, he flew. Now, think about that for a second. It's actually pretty profound. We always focus on the crash, the melted wings, the guy falling from the sky, hitting the water and dying. But we forget, before all of that, he fucking flew. Now, maybe you're not familiar or you don't know the Icarus myth, so I'm not going to go through all of it, but if I have to nutshell the story for you, basically, because of something that his father did, Icarus and his father, they were imprisoned in a tower by King Minos of Crete. And Icarus's father was a brilliant inventor. So, he started studying, while he was in that tower, he started studying the patterns and how the birds flew. And long story short, he gathered fallen bird feathers, he glued them together with wax, and then he built two sets of wings for them to escape. So the plan was actually quite simple. Use these wings, jump off the tower, and fly away to freedom. And of course, before they did, the father warned his son about not flying too high because the sun would melt the wax. Now, you may have guessed that Icarus didn't listen. He flew too close to the sun, and what had to happen happened. Splash! Icarus fell into the sea and he died. Now, this myth, this story, is always thrown at people as some kind of cautionary tale. Okay? Don't get cocky. Don't ignore wisdom. Don't take too many risks. Don't the arrogance and all of that. But what you will never hear, or almost never hear, is the other side of the story. It's the inspirational tale. Okay, a human being flying through the sky. And I think that that part matters just as much as the warning. Now, you might be wondering, where am I going with this? Okay, what does Icarus and the myth and the flying guy have to do with AI and marketing and content and money and authenticity and all of that? Well, let me tell you, right now, we are in the flying phase when it comes to AI content. And I don't mean content about AI, okay, although that's another flood worth talking about, but I mean AI generated content. Everyone is riding the wave. Okay? You only have to scroll through your LinkedIn feed or any other social media to see the magic formula repeated over and over again, everywhere. Create consistently, leverage AI to scale production, follow what's trending, build your brand. Now, don't misunderstand me, okay? I don't say you shouldn't use AI, okay? And I'm not saying you shouldn't build a personal brand, although that's not for everyone. But a few months ago, I made a keynote on personal branding, and it's important. So, it's called $1 Trillion Phases, if you're interested. It's free on YouTube and Spotify. But anyway, I'm not saying it's all bad, okay? It has opened lots of opportunities. You have small businesses that now can compete with massive corporations. You have creators, influencers that are building audiences and cohorts of followers that the traditional media only can dream about. So basically, AI has removed the traditional barriers to content production. They're gone. But here's the thing. I think that most of us don't realize yet how close we are getting to the sun. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, what's actually happening, if you take it to the macro, it's a massive flood of synthetic content. Okay, now already, just scroll to your feed. What you will see is that 99% of content is all, you could say, slight variations of exactly the same. It's synthetic, it's generic, it's repetitive. Okay? And sure, I mean, you can argue that most of the time it's well written, but the package is good. But if you look deeper, if you look beyond the package, it's completely void of any meaning, of any real value. It's what I like to call top of the line generic bullshit. the kind of stuff like employees are not children, or no pain, no gain, grind, 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 all of that. And let's not even talk about the endless tsunami. It's not a flood anymore, it's a tsunami of generic AI crap. To think like AI won't replace workers, but a worker using AI will. Yes, it will. Okay, AI will replace workers, but that's another topic. So let's not go astray, and let's go back to content, synthetic content. And maybe just to start with, I think it's important to understand the orders of magnitude we're talking about. So let's not talk about quality or the deeper meaning and value of content for a second. Let's just take a look at the quantity. Let's look at the numbers. If you look at a few social networks, LinkedIn, for example, today it's over 2 million posts, articles, videos that are created every single day. Okay? If you look at Twitter or X, to please Elon Musk, 500 million tweets daily, 500 million. If you look at Instagrams, it's 95, I think, or 100 million pictures, videos, reels every day. TikTok, it's more than 1 billion videos that are viewed every day. So we're not talking about small scales, okay? It's a whole other level of magnitude. It's big numbers. Now, you may think, so what? Well, what's happening is that AI abilities, they are supercharging this exponentially. Okay? What used to take hours now takes seconds. What once required specialized skills can be done by anyone with the right prompts. But the result of this is not that it's just going to create more noise. It will exponentially because anyone can do it. But the result isn't just more noise. I want to argue that it's something that's way deeper than that. I would argue that it's a fundamental shift in how information flows through, you would say, both technological and human systems. And human systems is key here, okay? And when I talk about human systems, I talk about our brains. The way information flows through our brains is radically shifting. We already see it. Attention spans are shrinking. You could even say collapsing. We have floods of content, and everyone, literally everyone, is fighting for our attention. And that's something, it's going to sound obvious when I say it, but I do so many consulting uh, with big companies that don't understand this. You need to understand that it's not just you and your competitors that are fighting for people's attention. It's all social media platforms. It's the streaming services, Netflix, Disney Plus, HBO. How many of these services do you have? It's news apps, the breaking news, the clickbait headlines. It's email marketing campaigns. And you can go on and on. Messaging apps, friends and family on WhatsApp, on Messenger. It's mobile games, billboards, work emails, Slack messages. It's brutal. Everyone is fighting for everyone's attention. And so, in a hyper-connected world where competition for our attention is intense, let's call it that way, the relationship between value and originality and impact isn't linear anymore. It's logarithmic. Okay? The relationship between value, originality, and impact is logarithmic. Think of it as a logarithmic value curve. And if you aided algebra or calculus, let me try to put it in simple terms. What I mean is that in a pre-AI world, you could say that being 10% more original than someone else, than the average, might have gotten you like 10% more impact, give or take. Okay, it was a fairly direct linear relationship. The principle of the logarithmic curve is that in today's world, being 10% more original gets you, I don't know, perhaps 1% more impact. Being 100% more original might only get you, I don't know, 10%, 8% more impact. Okay, so you need to understand that. It's now what I believe, and I'm going to break away from the typical logarithmic curve a bit, but I would argue that in this new world, if you are able to push way beyond the 10 or the 100% more original, like, I don't know, being 1,000% more creative, being more original, but by orders of magnitude, this is where the real disproportionate returns now live. Okay, that's where, and it's probably the only place where you can stand out in an ocean of sameness. In a flood of synthetic content, I would argue that radical differentiation is the only thing that's really gonna cut through the noise. So let me take a theoretical example. So let's say a creator, and let's call him creator A, right? Letter A to be very original. Creator A produces content that's 10% better than average. Creator A gets about a 1% boost in attention. Creator B produces content that's 50% better than average. He will get, I don't know, a 4 or 5% boost in attention. But if we now look at Creator C produces content that's 500% different. It's not just better, it's fundamentally different. Well, Creator C will see, I don't know, a 200, 300% boost in attention. Okay, we still have that logarithmic relationship, it's capped off, but that's the orders of magnitude we're going to talk about. And some will say, oh, yeah, it's a hypothetical. It's not. It's really not. We can already see this playing out. Across platforms on social media, what we see is that truly distinctive voices are capturing massively disproportionate amounts of attention. The truly distinctive voices capture disproportionate amounts of attention. And because the flip side of this is we're talking about a tiny substrata, right? We're talking about top 1%. But meanwhile, the question we have to ask is what happens to the good average? Okay, let's not even talk about the crap, the bad creators, okay? What happens to the good average? You know, the one with good enough content or pretty good enough. Well, these creators are barely getting seen at all. And this is only gonna accelerate. So we are entering, I would say, a brutal winner takes it all dynamic. It's not a winner takes it all, it's a winners take it all. You're gonna have a few people living there on top, where basically small differentiation gets you nothing, and radical differentiation gets you everything. And when I talk about everything, I talk about business. I talk about money. I talk about real results. I'm not talking about the vanity metrics. I'm not talking about the likes, the comments, the share, but I'll get back to that. So basically, we are entering a world where everyone is going to try to be a successful creator. But, and that's the point, human attention is finite. It's limited. Okay? My thesis is even worse than that. My thesis is that it's shrinking. So in order not even to thrive, but to survive in this attention economy, everyone is going to try to stand out, to be different, because it's going to be the only way. Remember that logarithmic curve. So everyone's going to try to stand out. But the thing is, this is not really what's going to happen, right? What I should have said instead of everyone is going to try to stand out is everyone is going to ask ChatGPT, is going to ask AI, is going to ask their content agents to produce, differentiating content, to be unique, to be bold, to be raw, to be authentic, to be disruptive, right? We're going to see lots and lots of prompts and appearing so that anyone can be different. But when everyone is different, no one is different again, right? So with every iteration, with every post, it's only gonna make the problem that I'm describing worse. Now, this brings me to, I would say, my next point. It's the attention versus engagement, you could call it fallacy. You see, people are out there competing for likes, for comments like brilliant post, Jane, or thought provoking, or, eh, most of these comments are also generated by AI, by the way. But this race for likes is a huge misunderstanding of how business actually works. And yes, of course, for a tiny slice of the population, a tiny substrata, likes equal business. Think about, the influencers who monetize their likes. The more eyeballs on them, the more likes, the more engagement with their content, the better. Because for now, many brands are still reasoning this way. His latest post about whatever miracle cure or product, they got 1 million likes. Amazing. We're gonna get 1 million likes too, and so we're gonna pay for that. Right? Okay, that's still a business that's working that way. And again, for a tiny slice of the population, likes equals business. But for the rest of us, it's not the case. I think we've been sold a very dangerous myth, another myth than the Icarus myth, but the myth that engagement equals attention and that attention equals business impact. The reality is far more complex than that. I would say that if you look at engagement types, there are 4 big layers when it comes to engagements and how these engagements translate into actual business value, meaning money, revenue. Okay, so number 1, there is what I would call identity signaling engagements. Okay? It's when people engage with content mostly to signal something about themselves to their network. All the I stand with, or we believe in work-life balance, or this needs to change, or all of that. Hard work pays off, and all of that kind of engagement. Sure, it's usually most of it, 99.9%, high visibility, near zero business value. Okay? That's a reality. High visibility, near zero business value. Then we've got the passive consumption, or you could call it the scroll through engagement. That's when people mindlessly, and when I say people, I mean, I'm also a victim to that. Okay, I'm not saying I'm a superior human being, but I'm a people too. Okay, passive consumption is when people mindlessly consume content without a real interest or without a real intent. So, that's basically the 3-second video views, or when someone reads 20% of your post and asks AI to comment on it, or a newsletter subscriber who opens a newsletter but never clicks or never, responds to your call to action. You could say that it's just like someone watching a motivational video, nodding along, and then moving on to the next post without doing anything about it. And of course, these kinds of engagements, they can generate massive or impressive results, but usually they also have very low business value. So again, you have the metrics, but you don't have the business value. The third layer on the cake is more, you need to understand that it's like a pyramid-shaped cake, right? The first layer is the most common, and then the more we build up, of course, the smaller the market. But next on is information gathering engagement. And that's when people genuinely process the content and when they start, let's say, considering how it might apply to them. They consider it, but they are not really ready to act yet. So it's not just passive consumption. Okay, they are thinking about it. That maybe they're even taking some notes, but there is no action. It's a kind of when people say, oh, I'm saving this for knowledge for future use, or it's reading a case study about something new and thinking, oh yeah, maybe we should try this. But all of this is more than we are entering in a medium to low visibility. And if you look at business value, it's unpredictable business value. Because again, everyone is fighting out there for their intention. So it might stick, especially if you retarget them, and we're entering then in ads strategy more than organic content production. But it, the business value is unpredictable. So low visibility, unpredictable business value. And then finally, the fourth layer, you could say the top of the pyramid, is transformative engagements. To be bombastic about vocabulary, but transformative engagement is the rarest, but also the most valuable type of engagement. That's when you could say your content shifts someone's perspective or his behavior. Okay? It's when they start thinking, this guy or this gal stated my problem so well, probably better than I could have, that he or she must have the answer. And so let me give you a personal example to illustrate this. So since I started creating content, I've gotten really lots of DMs, so messages on LinkedIn, from people asking me to consult for their business, or to consult on a specific problem, or set up a coaching session. And I learned two big lessons. And the first lesson that I got is that the posts that triggered those DMs, that compelled these people to reach out to me, are usually not the posts that get the most likes. Okay? Because I'm also producing content for likes, right? It spreads the word. I'm not saying don't do content for the likes. That's not what I'm saying. But we're going to get back to what I believe to be the right proportion of the different types of contents. But so, yeah, the business inquiries or potential business inquiries that I get are usually negatively correlated to the likes that I get on the post. So the posts with the less likes usually get me the most business. And you would be surprised how my most contrarian posts and comments, because that's another strategy. Today, I would say comments are a new form of content. If you engage thoughtfully, if you add value on someone else's post, this is also content. Yeah, but I would say you would be surprised how my most contrarian posts and comments are the ones that generate the most potential business. I get messages from people telling me that how refreshing this is, how authentic it is. Finally something real, or just not the usual corporate bullshit. Now, I'm not saying that this should be your niche, right? Contrarian thinking. This is my niche because it's a natural extension of who I am, but that's something else. So that was lesson number one. I would say the second thing that I've learned is that 95% of the people who reach out, asking me to consult for them, never liked or even commented on any of the posts that led them to me, or any of the posts for that matter. So this is what we call the silent community. So 95% of the people that reach out don't comment and don't leave likes. So this type of engagement is nearly invisible if you look only at the vanity metrics. If you look at the likes and the shares, those people don't exist. But this type of engagement has an extremely high business value. Now, okay, fancy terms, 4 layers of the cake, etc., etc., but what's the real value of this? Well, the reason why I tell you this is that the thing that's on your side, your edge, is that most people don't understand how personal branding business works. Okay? Most people optimize their content to maximize the first two types of engagements, the identity signaling and the passive consumption, okay, for the vanity metrics, which explains also why viral content so rarely translates into business results. Lots of likes, almost no business, almost no money. And just look at the data. Okay, posts with high engagements, so tons of shares, tons of likes, usually convert to actual business, to money, at less than 0.1% in most industries, right? 1/1000 of what you see translate into business. Less than that, to be fair. But what we see is that content with moderate engagement that is highly relevant to a specific audience, that can convert 5 to 10 times better. Now, of course, if you have moderate engagement because you are a moderate content creator and you don't have a real following, that's something else. But all things equal, content with moderate engagement, but that's highly relevant to a specific audience, that converts 5 to 10 times better. And ultimately, top of the cake is when you do highly targeted content, right, niched content, with fewer likes, they usually outperform viral posts by a magnitude of 20 to 30 when it comes to actually driving real business. And that is true, not just with posts and all of that. We also see that there are people with huge email lists, millions of people that, of course, if you look, it's a numbers game, part of. So they generate business because the list is that huge, but the ratio business to user is extremely low. And then you got people with, I don't know, email lists of 500 or 1,000 people, but that are highly targeted, highly specialized, highly narrowed down, and they generate as much business, or sometimes even more, than people with a list of 1 million email addresses on them. So again, and highly targeted. And most of the time, you could say it's a pretty binary choice, actually. Do you want the crown, the spotlight, or do you want the business, the money? Right? And if you want the spotlight, if you want the crown, good luck. Okay, that's as red as an ocean can be. Okay? That's where everyone competes. That's where everyone is now firing, you could say, rounds of synthetic AI generated content. But if you want the business, well, I got some good news for you. There is a space for that. So back to Icarus, you could say that there is still a safe fly zone, a kind of safe corridor where Icarus can fly without burning his wings in the overdose of synthetic content. And that safe fly zone, that corridor, that future, it lives in what I call the equation that brings together three variables: real authenticity, okay, emphasis on the real, hyper segmentation, and then what I call omnology. Omnology, the ability to make sense of multiple domains, of multiple areas of expertise, and synthesize that into something that creates more value. Now, I know that some people will say that it's a paradox to put together in the same equation hypersegmentation, right, which is basically deep specialization, and combine that with omnology, with spreading yourself across multiple topics. But it's not a paradox. And I'll get back to that later on, because what I want to do now is I want to break down the equation and take every variable, every part of it individually. So I want to address real authenticity, I want to address hypersegmentation, and I will address omnology in three different phases. So real authenticity. Now, before I define that, I think it's important to remember that the very concept of authenticity is something that has evolved quite a lot over time. Okay, so we went through different or distinct, you could say, historical phases. And this is not a history course, but you're going to see where I get with that. I think it's important for you to understand how authenticity builds up so that you can basically synthesize what real authenticity means. So if you look really back in the days, pre-mass media, okay, pre-1950s probably, authenticity before the rise of mass media was, people's lives were mostly private. Okay, and you could say that their public personas were quite limited, right? They were limited to small local communities. So in that context of pre-mass media authenticity was about consistency. Someone was considered authentic if their public actions, you could say, reflected their true private character, as judged by the people who actually knew them. So pre-mass media, authenticity was consistency. How much of the same were you in your private versus your public life? Then came mass media authenticity. That was, I don't know, 1950s to the year 2000, something like that. And in that era, you could say authenticity was defined by the ability to appear genuine, the ability to appear real in highly produced contexts. So, for example, a politician giving a speech or a movie star in an interview was considered authentic if they came across as sincere. Even though you could say that the context around them was carefully staged, right? Then came the internet and social media authenticity. You could say that's still the era we are in, or we are transitioning away from. Okay? And this is where authenticity became about, or all about, strategic vulnerability, and the behind the scenes access and all of that. So that's the phase where influencers and public figures are expected, you could say, to share personal, real moments. And of course, it all has to appear raw and unfiltered. But more often than not, it's carefully engineered just to build that trust and credibility. And finally, we come to the latest phase. It's the AI era authenticity. So in a world where AI can generate hyper-realistic content about almost anything, right? We see the deep fakes, we see the AI-generated texts, images, videos. It's crazy what they can do with videos nowadays. They can clone your voice, all of that. So in a world where AI can generate hyper-realistic content, authenticity, you would say, is shifting, and it's increasingly linked to things that are hard to fake. So you could say signals that cannot easily be synthesized. So the live interactions, the unique imperfections, if I want to use, a corporate word, but everything that's verifiably human. So I would say even more so in texts that you read, okay? I'm not saying it cannot be co-produced by AI, but you can feel it when there is some unique human touch. You literally can read different texts, you can feel it. And so the reason I told you about the 4 eras is because I would argue that each era did not replace the era before it. Okay? You could say that each era added layers of complexity to the game. It added layers of complexity to how authenticity is, on one hand, perceived, but on the other hand, performed. But here is the problem that we have. If you now look at AI can mimic the first 3 forms of authenticity almost perfectly. It can create consistent messaging, it can fake sincerity, it can even craft vulnerability stories, stories that feel personal, where people just expose their vulnerabilities. And so this creates, I would say, a new authenticity spectrum. You have new categories that emerge from all of that. The first one is synthetic conformity. And that's basically content that's generated by AI that plays it safe. Okay? AI that follows the patterns that we've seen a million times. It conforms to the norm. Okay? So synthetic conformity. Then we have synthetic differentiation. That is content that is AI generated, but that is designed, you would say, to look unique. And sometimes it truly breaks the mold. Okay? But most of it, I would argue, feels empty. It has no real soul to it. Still, of course, it can get tons of likes and identity signaling, engagement, and all of that. But most of the time, it has no soul. It's empty, at least today. Then we have human conformity. Okay, that is content that is made by humans, but it's just as tired. It's using the same overused, recycled, I would say lazy ideas. Then we have human differentiation. That is human-made content that breaks the conventions, and that's not the usual, let's say, BS or corporate bullshit. It's something fresh and bold and that actually stands out. And then the end of the spectrum is integrated authenticity. Or again, maybe I should not say the end of the spectrum. I'm not sure there is a real linear progression in that, where you place the different categories in the spectrum. It's actually up to you, but you could rate them in terms of impact, that's for sure. So you would probably then start with a human. Anyways, the end of the spectrum is integrated authenticity, which is probably, I would argue, the one that gives the best results on average. And I would say that integrated authenticity only works if you have mastered, and I insist on the mastered, if you have mastered human differentiation first. If you haven't mastered human differentiation, then you're falling back into the idea of synthetic differentiation. So integrated authenticity is when people use AI to enhance their ideas, to augment them, to build upon their ideas, not to replace them. It's when they can create something, you would say, that is truly unique, something that feels real, that has that soul that we were talking about, something that is meaningful. And I would say that most people, most businesses, they're operating in, categories 1, 2, 3. And of course, which leaves a big, big opportunity for those that are bold enough to step into category 4 and 5, human differentiation and integrated authenticity. Now, let me be clear before we move on. Okay? I'm not staying here saying, don't use AI. Okay? That would be stupid. But at the same time, I'm telling you, don't lose your ability to think. And I see so many people nowadays outsource their thinking to AI as step one in any thinking or creative or content creating process. Thinking outsourced is step one of any process. And it's wrong. It's dead wrong. I think that by far one of the biggest short-term risks of that widespread use of generative AI and all the other forms of AI is that we are creating an entire generation of people who cannot think, who cannot write, who cannot communicate. That's real, right? And yes, okay, it's a terrifying thought. Again, prophet of doom and all of that. But I would argue that what's even worse, or more terrifying, is that it's not that unlikely at all. I don't believe it's a possible future. I believe that even before AI, if you look at social media and you combine that with the progressive education system, well, that combination was already numbing people down. We've seen this trend emerge with Gen Z, right? That inability, again, making generalizations, but with Gen Z, the inability to think critically, to stick with something, to sustain effort, to write, to communicate, to face and solve, you would say, real challenges. And yes, I'm sorry to be blunt again, but for most, it's true. If you know a Gen Zer, you know it's true. And I'm not saying that it's not pleasing to hear. I'm not saying it's fun. It's true. But now, my concern is that if you look at, for the first time in history, what we are seeing is that an emerging generational pattern, a negative pattern, what we saw with Gen Z and that inability to think and sustain, we are seeing it working, I would say, its way back into older generation. All of that, because people outsource their thinking, is spreading like a virus. People, I would say, who used to think first, they don't do that anymore. People who used to be creative or real problem solvers, they now ask ChatGPT first. And this is going to hurt badly. Okay? Because integrated authenticity, which I argued is the best form of authenticity, the most powerful one, it's a duo. It's a tandem. Okay? It's you and AI. But in you and AI, there is you. Okay? And now let's be radically and brutally honest. Okay? Not that many people were capable of human differentiation to begin with. Right? And some are going to be shocked, but critical, nuanced, and creative thinking, it takes work. And most people haven't trained those muscles. It's not that they don't have the capability to, it's just that they have not trained that. And that's a totally different debate. So what I want to tell you is that if you disappear from the equation, if you don't double down on cultivating the uniqueness within you, to almost quote Tony Robbins, it's game over. So if you disappear from the equation, it's game over. So variable number one of the equation was cultivate real authenticity. Next on, second variable is hyper-specialization. And if you've watched my keynote, A Trillion Dollar Faces from a few months ago, I mentioned it at the beginning, you will recognize what I'm going to say now. Okay? That keynote was about personal branding, but I believe that the content in that keynote, although it's months old, with now seems like ages, it's still highly relevant. Anyway, what I said in that keynote was that artificial intelligence, AI, is a very disruptive element when it comes to driving business, especially via content creation. And it is fundamentally changing the game for two major reasons. We've talked about this already, but to be more specific, the main reason why it changes the game is first, I think it's very clear by now, but it commoditizes content production and therefore the value of work. We've talked about the flood of synthetic content. Well, it's not even a flood anymore, right? It's a never-ending tsunami. Everyone, everywhere, can now create well-written content. And so they do. And here's the thing. Whenever something becomes a commodity, volume goes up, value goes down. So what's the strategy against commoditization, right? What's your edge? How do you edge against that? Well, when commoditization happens, when everything gets flooded with content or products or services, the winning strategy is always the same. Niche down. Okay? The bigger and the more crowded the market gets, the more you would say the real opportunities, the money and the profits, well, it's found in the niches. So in the past, recent past, generalist content or broad-based content, it worked on social media. But that was then. And I would argue this is now. And you know it's true. Okay? You may not like it, but you know it's true. You can see it unfolding in real time. Artificial intelligence is already dominating generalist content. It's everywhere. And so people will, back to that authenticity and real authenticity, but people will increasingly be seeking even more very specific niche content. Now, the good thing with niches is that you don't need to appeal to everyone. Okay? You need to own your space within that niche. Remember back to what I said, some people with 1 million subscribers on their email list make less money than some people with 500 highly specialized and targeted people on their email list. So you don't need to appeal to everyone, you just need to own your space. And I know some people will say, but won't AI dominate that as well? I would say let's not go into that rabbit hole for now, because regardless of the answer, I think you gotta do something, right? You're not gonna stay there and wait to gently die. So you gotta do something. So right now, today, niche down. That's the strategy. So here, I would say here's what's gonna happen, or maybe I should say accelerate in the coming years or months. People are going to start looking for things that are very, 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 I could be saying that on repeat, very specific on social media. People will want that. And so the level of fragmentation is going to skyrocket to insane levels. And when I talk about fragmentation, what you need to understand is the need for hyper specialization, which is the second variable of our equation. And if you look at it, it's exactly what has already happened and is still happening in the music industry, for example. So years ago, I gave that example in the keynote, but years ago, music was more or less, you could say, grouped into a few broad categories, right? You had country, rock, pop, rap. But if you look now, you got niche genres for everything. We got C-punk, we got lo-fi, beats, hyperpop, vaporwave. I mean, you name it, okay? And of course, I gave radical examples, but those niches are there. And artists in these niches, some make fortunes. So if you take the the best-selling album in history, which is Thriller by Michael Jackson, at one point in time, that album, the music on that album, literally represented, I don't know, maybe 30% of the radio airplay worldwide in every country. Why was that? Because back then, Michael Jackson was the artist with the most success. The thing that I challenge you to do nowadays is to find someone like that. Okay? And I know that some people will say, oh, Taylor Swift. No. I mean, yes, Taylor Swift is one of the biggest names out there. You could say she's almost a goddess amongst artists. But her audience is nowhere near as universal as Michael Jackson's audience was. And just think, to go farther on this concept, think about how many songs that you recognize because of suggestions, because of the algorithm, because all of that. Songs that you recognize, but where you have absolutely no clue who the artist is, what they do, what they look like. Is it a man or a woman? Is it both? It's just insane. And then on the other hand, you got artists that you have never heard of, but your friends or your kids, they would die for a picture with them. That's something quite new. You would say that before, no one would ever said, I don't know who Michael Jackson is. So we lived in a world where there used to be famous people on one hand and non-famous people on the other hand. Now, you got to think about fame in a totally different spectrum. Okay, you got different kinds of famous. You got globally famous, Taylor Swift, for example, famous within niches. You could think about some DJs, and then you even got like famous people in market fragments. Someone that's famous on YouTube. Think about Inoxtag or Squeezie on the French market, or all of that. People that are famous on YouTube, people that are famous on TikTok. We even got people that are famous now in Telegram groups. And I mean, that's something crazy if you think about it, okay? There are people out there with a community of 20,000 who are absolute gods within that group. But outside of those 20,000 people, no one knows them. Absolutely no one. And the same thing is happening to content. AI will fragment audiences even further. So the strategy right now for 2025, and let's see after that, it's all about hyper segmentation, because it's the easiest way to differentiate. It's the easiest way to be authentic and creative when you can be hyper targeted, laser focused. And so your unique, and I get back to that concept, as a circle, your unique perspective and its execution will be the true differentiators. So what that also tells you is that you need to start now, because the game is only going to get more complex, right? So first variable, second variable, now hypersegmentation, the first variable, real authenticity, and then finally the third variable in my equation, omnology. Again, bombastic, but I think I, I haven't found, I mean, for lack of a better word, I went with omnology. And so you need to become an omnologist. And if you don't know what an omnologist is, you could say that it's a master of many fields, right? It's someone who can connect, because they master so many fields, they can connect dots across industries, right? Across disconnected subjects or disconnected ideas, they can connect dots. And you could say that it's someone that not just specializes, but that synthesizes, okay? That blends knowledge from, I don't know, science, business, tech, art, from everywhere to come up with something new. Okay? When you blend existing ideas and concepts, you can create something that is more than the sum of its parts, right? You've already heard that. When the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Or this is what is also known as, emergent properties or emergent concepts. And it may sound very technical, because you may see these words used more and more, because emergent properties is a concept often used in AI. But let me give you a simple science example to explain what an emergent property is, the whole concept of omnology. So if you take water, H2O, right? Two atoms of hydrogen, one atom of oxygen combined. Okay? On their own, so the hydrogen on its own or the oxygen on their own, neither of them is wet. Okay? They're both gases, of course, at standard temperature and pressure. And well, let's not overcomplicate. So both hydrogen and oxygen on their own are gases. But when you combine them, they become liquid. They become water. Okay? And the wetness of water emerges. So you could say it's a new property that didn't exist in either element on its own. So the liquid phase and the wetness are both emergent properties. They happen because you combined two individual elements and the whole is bigger than the sum of its parts. Now, back to what we said earlier. Some people, when I talk about this, say, but that's a paradox. An equation that combines hypersegmentation with spreading yourself across multiple topics. And I argue it's not. Okay? You could say that omnology is a form of hyperspecialization. And yes, of course, it's hard. I'm not going to argue against that. It requires a level of expertise that is very difficult to achieve. Okay? That's why specialization was created in the first place in the past, to make it easier for people or for more people to be really good in specific areas. But here's the reality. We know that AI is gonna dominate both specialized and generic thinking. It's starting with the generic, but it's also getting goddamn good at very specialized thinking. So that's not a wild speculation. Okay? It's a fact you can already verify by yourself. Play with AI, play with advanced models of ChatGPT or Claude 3.7 or whatever. Mix them, play with them. You will see they're getting very good. So the real superpower, the real edge will not be to do what AI does better than AI. That's a losing game. Okay? The real superpower will be your ability, I would say, to create collisions between your diverse interests, okay? To connect ideas in ways that AI cannot. Or at least, let's say, in ways that AI will not naturally be able to do without being extremely well guided, extremely well prompted, extremely well challenged. And for you to do that, to guide AI to create these collisions, to prompt AI, that requires human differentiation. And this is exactly why I believe that in an AI world, you cannot afford to surrender your ability to think. You cannot. And I know that the fairy tale is being peddled and we hear it everywhere. And AI is going to make it easier for everyone to level up. And it's not. Okay, think about it for a second. If everyone levels up, no one levels up. Okay, the net effect is zero. If someone levels up but the rest not, yes, you got a delta. But if everyone levels up, the net effect is zero. So AI is not going to make it easier for everyone to level up because no one is absolutely, they are leveling up, but relatively, no one is leveling up. So if you want to stand out, it's going to take extra effort, even more effort than it used to. It's getting harder out there because of AI, not easier. That's the reality. That's not the fairy tale. That's not what you really want to hear, but it's going to get harder. So the real game is about forcing yourself to think in a world that is outsourcing thinking. It's about being able to operate in the gray zone and understand, all the shades of gray, you would say, in a world that's becoming increasingly black and white. So it's about understanding that everything is complex, that everything is nuanced, right? And I know that today it's a radical to think that way, but it's not. Okay, oversimplification, putting everything into black and white, into little boxes, is the death of critical thinking, the death of real, raw human intelligence. And you need that. Remember that duo, AI and you. AI and human differentiation, not AI human conformity. So, finally, I would say that my best advice here, of course, work on that omnology, yeah, but is, if I had to give you one advice, ditch the chat GPT reflex. Okay, I don't say ditch chat GPT, ditch the chat GPT reflex. It shouldn't be the first step of everything that you do. Okay, your raw critical thinking should always remain step one. Okay, so let AI be a slave to your ideas, not the other way around. Don't be a slave to AI because very, very soon and faster than you ever imagined, it rewires your entire thinking process and you become addicted to that. You cannot think without AI anymore. So use it, augment your ideas, enhance your ideas. And yes, it's hard, okay? But you see, when I talk about the equation that brings together real authenticity, hypersegmentation, and omnology, I believe that the property that connects those variables, it's a multiplicative relationship. It's not an additive one. They do not add to each other. They multiply. Okay? And that's very important because if there is one of the three variables that you don't master, the whole equation turns into zero, right? A million times zero is always equal to zero, right? That's what happens with multiplication. So again, when I do these things, I tend to get carried away. So let me try to wrap this up and to bring this video to an end, by you could say channeling my inner Nostradamus, okay, by making some predictions and by trying to predict at least what the near future will look like. So I believe that the key trends that will shape, if you will, the next evolution of this crazy landscape are: one, people will build a sixth sense and get increasingly better at detecting AI generated content. It has been the same with ads. When copywriting emerged and real good copywriting in ads, it worked like the charm over people and then they got immune. So they will build a sixth sense and get increasingly better at detecting AI generated content, even as that content becomes more sophisticated and harder to tell apart, right? because AI may iterate faster than we do, but at the end, we still have that ability to iterate. So people will build that sixth sense. That's one. I would say that two, if you look at the major platforms, they will keep splintering, right? Fragmenting more and more into smaller and more specialized communities. So each community with their own unique and specific content expectations. And I would say that three, there's going to be a, how am I going to call that? There's going to be a value shift, okay? The perceived value of content, the real value of content, actually, it won't just come from content itself anymore. Okay, so what do I mean by that? That the value of content won't come from content. I believe that the value from content will come from two major dimensions. One, who is presenting the content, and two, in what context. Okay, so let me explain. With synthetic content overload, people will look for even more shortcuts. Fine. Heuristics at play. That's how the human brain works. We look for shortcuts, right? Biases and all of that. So with the overload, people will counterbalance that by looking for even more shortcuts because there is just too much out there. So what will happen is that if you are someone that your community likes and trusts, your content will get the priority. It's already the case, but it's going to accelerate and just amplify. And that's the who. People who are liked and trusts will give value content. That's the who. And when it comes to the context, I think that raw information, raw facts, information for the sake of information, it doesn't mean much anymore, especially in a world where people are outsourcing their thinking, okay, where they don't want to think by themselves anymore. They are looking not for the raw information, they're looking for what it means, for the interpretation of that information. And so the value will come with how content is framed, okay, and you could say it could be done through different ways, done for you analysis, storytelling, all of that. The ability to make sense of information for people is what's really gonna matter. And some will again argue it's already the case. It is. Same thing. It's just gonna accelerate. So the real value of content, that value shift, the perceived value, is going to come from who is presenting. Are you liked and trust within a specific community and niche? You will get the priority. And one of the reasons why you will be liked and trust, you could say it's a symbiotic relationship, will be how will you be able to give meaning to that content, to think for people, right? Like to pre-fed analysis. That's, you could say it's sad, but it's a reality. If you extrapolate the trend, that's where we're going to. So I would say that because this video is has to come to an end at some point. So next to my predictions, which is one thing, and all the hard work that you will need to put in, let me maybe give you some practical implementation steps, some things that you can take and start doing. So I would say number one, easy, if you're not already creating business driving content, start now. Okay? The game is only going to get tougher. We've covered that already. Two, if you create content, if you do that already, I would say audit your current content mix. Okay? Be brutally honest about it. What percentage of your content falls into synthetic conformity, right? AKA corporate bullshit. What percentage of your content is truly genuine differentiation? And then I would say probably, so what's synthetic, what's differentiating, truly, genuinely. And then probably I would say the most important is, are you optimizing for the right type of engagement? Are you optimizing for the engagement that is driving business, generating revenue, money? Or are you optimizing for the likes and the crown and the spotlight and the glory? Okay, be brutally honest about that. Again, there is nothing bad with glory. There is nothing bad with all of that. I'm not saying that, but I'll cover that soon. 3, I would say, you have to come up with authenticity signals. And coming up with authenticity signals, isn't that unauthentic? That's another debate. But you need to come up with authenticity signals. So how do you do that? Well, you start by identifying what makes you unique. And I know it sounds like cliche, okay, but it's the only thing you have left. So what aspects of your expertise, of your perspective, of your personality cannot be easily synthesized? You could say, what's yours, and that also stands out, right? That intersection between what's yours and what stands out. And once you've done that, then I would say create content formats that naturally highlight these unique elements. So is it in your storytelling? Is it in your tone? Or is it in the way you break down complex ideas? But create content formats. Okay? Build recognition patterns, specific elements that your audience can identify and can associate specifically with you. Those are the authenticity signals. What's uniquely yours to stand out, and create formats and build recognition patterns, way for people to associate certain things with you. 4, I think it's 4, yeah, 4, reassess your metrics. Okay, it's obvious, we've talked about it. Move beyond vanity metrics. Okay? Look for signs that go beyond the likes and the shares. Find proxies to measure that transformative engagement we talked about. Like, I don't know, what are start measuring the meaningful direct messages that you get, how many business inquiries, or the actions, everything that shows that your content is driving real change and interest. And then to answer the question about where do you find the balance, where is the trade-off, I would say number 5, I have a it's not that I mostly go with instinct, which is not good, but I would say initially I had that idea of a 70-20-10 content framework. And of course, you can tweak the proportions. You need to find what works for you. But if you are nowhere, try to stick to that. Try to start with that and then adjust and tweak and come in with your instinct at a certain point. But it's good to have some foundations, some backbone to start from. So what is 70-20-10? What does that mean? 70 is for 70% foundational content. Okay, that is content. You need to understand your audience, of course, basics of marketing, ideal customer profile, not average. So 70% foundational content. Once you know your audience, you know their expectations. Well, the foundational content is content that delivers on your audience's expectations, right? It's you could say, consistent value. Okay? 70% of foundational content. And this is where, of course, you can use AI to scale and stay efficient. Okay? That foundational content, you can scale it up, right? That was 70. And 20% differentiated content. Okay, that is content that pushes the limit, a little bit. You take some risks, you explore unique or fresh perspectives. Okay? And that can come from omnology sometimes. You may say, but how am I going to create ex nihilo out of nothing? Omnology, the ability to connect dots, H2 and O combining and creating water and wetness. Okay? So explore unique and fresh perspectives. And again, this is also where you combine AI with your own unique insights to create something that stands out, to create something, that's a whole that's bigger than the sum of its parts. And then finally, 10% radical content. And that is content, you could say, that completely breaks the rules. Content that takes big swings. Of course, be careful, okay? Don't say crazy stuff just for the sake of saying crazy stuff. You're not looking for a bad buzz or anything like that. But being strategically polarizing has some good. Strategically polarizing is basically it's going to repel people, sure. But if it repels the wrong audience and attracts the right audience, your ideal customer profile, it's good. So that's radical content. It's polarizing content, that brings something unique, that breaks the rules, that takes big swings, but that on average attracts more of your ideal customers than it repels them. And again, this is where you take the lead. Okay, you let AI play a supporting role. And I believe that, this approach strikes the right balance. Okay, it allows for consistency, because yes, consistency is a buzzword, it's overused, but it's still important. Okay, you got to be out there as much as possible if you want to stay visible. You got to remain top of mind in all the noise. I sometimes hear people, but if I post 5 times a day, I'm going to annoy my audience. No, you won't. Because most of it, because of the algorithm and all of that, most people in your audience, in your following base, won't maybe even see one of your 5 content pieces. Some will see 2. So that's it. Don't believe that every time you post, everyone following you and the whole world is seeing what you post. They're not. They may also not be on that social media network at the time, etc., etc. So consistency, be out there as much as possible. Note to myself, I should increase my uh, output. But anyways, so that's how you remain top of mind in all the noise. But at the same time, that balance also gives you room to think and to be able to produce content, for those, you could say, big, and to use an AI word, game-changing moments. Okay? It's that balance. So that's a trade-off. Be out there as much as possible, but create something unique. So, yes, Icarus fell. But let's not forget that before that, he flew. And the part that people skip over is, I would say, not just that he flew or that he fell. It's that the achievement, the fact of flying, wasn't the problem. The problem was that Icarus didn't understand the limits of his abilities, of his technology, the wings, and of the environment he was in. It was not the achievement. And that's exactly where we are right now. Okay, we are all flying right now. AI has given everyone a set of wings. And, maybe, let's not be blind to that option, to that potential option, but maybe AI means it's game over for all of us. Okay, I'm not fully convinced of that, okay, yet. But there is one thing that I'm 100% sure of. There is one thing I'm 100% convinced of, and it is that most people will crash. The Icarus fall at scale. Most people. And that will happen not because people are stupid, it will happen because they are chasing likes instead of business. You could say engagement instead of revenue, attention instead of action. And so at the end of the day, we are running businesses, or even if you're not running a business, you need to bring in the money, right? That's how the world works. But not only that, not because people chasing the spotlight and the crown, I would say that very few people understand the new success equation, the success equation in this new economy. Real authenticity, hyper-segmentation, and omnology. Few understand it. And even fewer, even when they understand it, are ready to put in the work. Okay, I think the trend has been set in motion. Okay, thinking is being outsourced as we speak. And if I'm being totally honest, I think it doesn't look like there is a coming back from this. Okay, so the only thing you can do about it is take responsibility for yourself. You can avoid falling into that trap. Again, it's an easy trap to fall into. But once you do, it starts rewiring your whole thought process, your whole brain. Okay, anyway, I'm not going to get into the neuroscience of this, but don't fall into that trap. The trend is in motion. We're not coming back from it. The only thing you can do is avoid it for yourself. Avoid it for your kids. Okay? The whole marketing game, next to that outsourcing of thinking, is drowning in synthetic bullshit. The whole world is drowning in synthetic bullshit. Okay? Everyone sounds the same. Everything looks the same. Same playbook, same AI tools, same empty content. And sure, it gets engagement. It's true. It gets engagements. But what's engagement worth when it drives near zero business results? What is it worth? And this isn't about, navigating the AI revolution or other consultant bullshit. Okay? I got no magical training to sell you. Okay? This is about survival. It's a big word, but it's the truth. Your business doesn't run on empty likes for, empty content. Okay? It runs on revenue, it runs on customers, it runs on actual fucking business. And the hard truth is that most marketing content today is worthless noise. Some will say it has always been. It has always been mostly noise, but noise wasn't worthless when it was bringing in the revenue, the customers. Today, it's worthless noise. Platforms are flooded. Okay? Attention is fragmented. You could say it's shrinking, collapsing as we speak, and authenticity is dying. Okay? Old rules don't work anymore. So I would say that the real truth, next to the hard truth, is that you have a choice. Two paths, right? It's forking. The road is forking. Option number one, keep doing what everyone else is doing. Use AI to pump out more content, more crap. You chase the engagement metrics, you follow the secret blueprints from the gurus. Okay. And as a result, slowly watch your business sink and drown in the synthetic flood. That's option number one. The second option is find ways to be genuinely different. Not just better, different. Use AI as a tool, not as a replacement for your thinking. Focus on the types of engagement that actually drive business. Build the kind of authenticity that can't be faked or not easily. Okay? The businesses, that's my strong conviction, the businesses that will survive won't be the ones with the most contents or the most likes. Not maybe as an exception. Okay? They will be the businesses that can still capture real attention in a world where attention is your biggest currency. Okay? And convert that attention into actual business, into real business. Icarus flew before he fell. The real question is, can you keep flying when everyone else is crashing? Thanks for watching.